Rachel Calhoun hung a simple spring wreath on her front door, and for that 2 fake HOA enforcers dragged her into an unmarked SUV in broad daylight. Bill and Randy May weren't police, but they ruled their neighborhood through fear, false authority, and a twisted sense of control. Just when hope seemed out of reach, her husband found a way to fight back with the help of someone who knew exactly how to bring abusers of power to their knees. But wait until you see how this unbelievable story turned and why in the end justice didn't just knock, it kicked the door down. It was the kind of spring afternoon Ethan Calhoun had come to appreciate in Eastfield. Quiet, warm, predictable. Birds chirped in the oaks lining the sidewalks, lawnmowers hummed in the distance, sprinklers ticked rhythmically across perfectly manicured lawns. He stood by the edge of his driveway, garden hose in hand, watching the droplets arc over his tulips. His wife Rachel was a few feet away, pinning up the new wreath. She had spent the morning crafting a bright little thing made of faux wildflowers and a thin yellow ribbon. Nothing loud, nothing outrageous, just a simple welcome to spring. Then came the SUV. It pulled up slowly, too slowly, across the street. Matte black windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. No license plate, no stickers, just there like it had materialized out of nowhere. Ethan straightened, slightly squinting against the sun. 2 men stepped out. They wore matching camouflage cargo pants, black shirts, and utility vests that looked military at first glance, but on closer inspection were clearly store-bought. One had a body cam clipped to his chest, the other carried a clipboard with loose pages fluttering in the breeze. Both wore mirrored sunglasses and earpieces, but the most unsettling part was the badges, shiny rectangles of cheap plastic that read in bold all caps font, HOA Enforcement Division, Neighborhood Order Task Unit. Rachel turned, a confused half smile forming on her face. "Can I help you, ma'am?" one of them barked, his voice clipped and rehearsed. "Your door decoration is in direct violation of Eastfield HOA Regulation 14.3. Please step forward for immediate compliance processing." Ethan froze, trying to process what he just heard. Rachel blinked, looked back at him, then back at the men. "I'm sorry, what?" "This is your notice of violation. Non-compliance is subject to enforcement measures." The taller man reached into his vest and unfolded a sheet of paper that looked like it had been printed at home, complete with a pixelated HOA logo and an illegible signature at the bottom. "This has to be a mistake," Ethan said, taking a step toward them. "It's a wreath for spring, sir," the second man warned, now moving between Ethan and Rachel. "Please remain where you are. This is official HOA business. You are not permitted to interfere." Rachel took a step back. "I'm not going anywhere with you." That was when it happened. Without warning, both men lunged forward. One grabbed Rachel by the arm, the other secured her shoulders. She screamed, more in shock than fear, and twisted in their grip. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, sprinting forward, the hose falling behind him. The taller man spun, pulled something from his belt, a stun device, and raised it just enough to send a message. "Don't escalate, sir. You're already on the watch list." Rachel was struggling now, shouting his name, her voice cracking, but before Ethan could take another step, they had pulled her across the lawn. One opened the SUV door, the other pushed her inside. The door slammed shut. Rachel's scream was muffled instantly by the soundproof cabin. The SUV reversed fast, then took off down the street without even signaling, tires screeching faintly as it turned the corner and disappeared behind the hedgerows. Ethan stood frozen in place, the sound of water still gurgling behind him from the abandoned hose. The neighbors, one man peeked out from behind his blinds, then vanished. A woman across the street looked up from her gardening, caught Ethan's eyes, then looked back down, pretending not to have seen a thing. Even the Amazon delivery driver who slowed his van when passing the SUV chose to keep moving fast. Ethan was alone, and his wife had just been taken in broad daylight under the flag of an authority that wasn't real, but nobody seemed to care. Not yet. The police station was cooler than outside, but Ethan's skin was burning. He sat across from Officer Ramirez, who looked over the incident report without much interest, as if this kind of thing happened every day. "They took my wife," Ethan repeated slower this time. "They pretended to be law enforcement and forced her into a car." Ramirez leaned back, arms crossed. "If they're part of your HOA's compliance team and you signed their charter, technically that falls under civil governance gray area." Ethan stared at him. "They aren't police, they aren't anything, just 2 guys in tactical gear playing soldier." Ramirez shrugged. "I've seen worse. File a complaint, maybe call a lawyer." That was it. No dispatch, no urgency, just polite indifference wrapped in procedure. Next stop, the Eastfield HOA office. Marvin Hedges was already waiting behind his oversized desk, sipping tea like a man completely untouched by the panic Ethan carried in his chest. "Mr. Calhoun," he said smoothly, "this must be about our volunteers. Your volunteers took my wife." Ethan said, "I want their names now." Marvin didn't even blink. "They were acting in the spirit of HOA regulation. Not everything needs formal approval. Sometimes leadership emerges where it's needed." "You're saying this was okay?" "I'm saying," Marvin replied, setting down his teacup, "that she broke the rules and they responded. Perhaps next time she'll consider her decor choices more carefully." It wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't bureaucracy, it was ideology, and Ethan realized then he wasn't dealing with neighbors, he was dealing with believers. Their names were Bill and Randy Mays, brothers by blood, partners by obsession. To most, they were just 2 faces lost in the sprawl of suburbia, aging men who blended into into hardware store aisles and weekend yard sales, but behind closed doors they called themselves something else: the Eastfield HOA Compliance Task Force, protecting order, enforcing pride. No such organization existed, not in state records, not in any HOA bylaw, not even in the minds of most residents, until it was too late. Bill Mays had once worked as mall security, a job he took far too seriously and lost just as quickly after that. It was a series of short-term gigs: warehouse night shifts, parking lot watchman, volunteer fire safety, but none of them satisfied the need he'd been nursing since childhood: to be obeyed, to be someone whose word meant consequence. Randy was different, less controlled, less concerned with structure. His past included multiple arrests, mostly for threats, one for a bar altercation that escalated fast. On paper he was a man seeking stability after trauma. In practice he was the enforcement arm of their operation. Fast to anger, faster to act. Together they built their world out of fragments: tactical vests ordered in bulk online, and official badges engraved by a trophy shop that never asked questions, and a fleet of wall warning forms printed on pastel-colored stationery, body cameras, flashlights, stun devices, zip ties, and at the center of it all a black SUV registered under a shell company named Mays Property Preservation LLC, which claimed to specialize in neighborhood asset recovery. There was no office, just a P.O. box and a garage full of gear. They had no training, no legal grounding, not even insurance, but they had belief, and in their eyes belief was enough. Their doctrine was simple: if real law enforcement won't act, someone has to. And in the quiet, rule-bound world of Eastfield they found a mission field. They started small: notes left on driveways, inspections of unlocked backyard gates, a stern presence at HOA meetings, a warning to a teenager for leaving his bicycle near the curb. It escalated slowly, so slowly most residents didn't notice the shift from concerned neighbors to self-appointed judges, until Rachel Calhoun hung a wreath, a cheerful floral wreath, yellow ribbon, fake lavender. To them it was a breach of visual protocol, a symbol of chaos masquerading as charm. In their report, which they drafted and filed in their own fabricated database, they wrote, "Subject has ignored previous guidelines and engaged in public defacement of the community's integrity. Action taken. Level 3 correctional engagement." In the space of a single form they had made themselves judge, jury, and enforcers. Rachel Calhoun didn't just break a rule, to them she broke the order, and in their world that was enough to act. The house stood at the edge of the development, past the cul-de-sac where lawns gave way to overgrown weeds. Foreclosed months ago, it had sat in silence, windows boarded, mailbox stuffed with weathered coupons and ignored notices. To most it was abandoned. To Bill and Randy Mays it was Sector 3 and said asset recovery zone. In their words, it was a necessary outpost for re-education and compliance reinforcement. In reality it was nothing more than a dark, unfinished basement in a home they didn't own, and it was where they kept Rachel Calhoun. They didn't restrain her to be cruel, at least not in their own minds. They did it to restore order. A rusted water pipe ran along the back wall of the basement, and to it they attached a short chain with a worn padded cuff. Rachel's wrist stayed locked in it for most of her time, their not so tight as to wound, but just enough to keep her seated. That's just contained, centered, as Randy liked to call it. The basement smelled of mildew, old drywall, and whatever had been in the fridge before the power went out. A single utility light flickered above, connected by a long orange extension cord snaking up the stairs. 3 times a day they brought her canned food, never labeled, never heated. One was clearly dog food. She didn't eat at each hour, almost like a ritual. Randy would come down with a small tripod and smartphone. He called them correctional segments. He made her repeat phrases like, "I am a disruptive neighbor. A beautiful home begins with beautiful discipline. Order matters more than taste." When she refused, he repeated them for her, then made her listen. Every video was uploaded to an unlisted channel titled Eastfield Ethics Archive. There were no subscribers, no likes, but that wasn't the point. They weren't making content, they were building evidence for an imaginary trial that only they believed in. Rachel spoke little. She conserved her strength. She stared into the darkness when alone, sometimes whispering to herself, not out of fear but to remember who she was before this place, and somehow that helped. It was the 3rd night when Ethan found her. He'd spent 2 sleepless days combing maps, cross-referencing city records, and tracking the faint GPS signal from Rachel's smartwatch, the one they must have forgotten she was wearing. When the signal blinked at the edge of the Birch Hollow lane, he drove there in silence from a patch of trees behind the lot. He watched through a cracked foundation window. The basement was dim, but he saw her sitting on the cold concrete floor, still, eyes forward, and then she looked up straight at him through the grime, through the shadows. No words, just a moment. 2 people, 1 silence, but it was enough, because now he knew where she was and they would not hold her much longer. Ethan didn't know where else to go. The local police had waved him off. The WA had all but laughed in his face. His wife was still missing, and time was a flame licking at the edges of his sanity. Then someone said, "Try Lori Finch. If anyone can make them pay, it's her." He drove 2 hours to her office, telling a converted warehouse on the edge of the county line, no receptionist, no flowers on the desk, just a plaque by the door that read Lori Finch, attorney at law, licensed to practice in 5 states, feared in all of them. She opened the door herself. 64, gray suit, black boots, sharp eyes behind narrow glasses. Her handshake was quick and firm, all business. Her office looked like a war room, legal texts, case files, and a map of Texas pinned with red and yellow thumbtacks. He told her everything from the wreath to the SUV, the basement, the HOA president, the video footage. She didn't interrupt once, just nodded slow and steady. Then he showed her the clip, the one where Rachel was forced to repeat phrases in that dim basement, light, eyes hollow but defiant. Lori watched it once. When it ended, she removed her glasses, cleaned them slowly, and said, "They're not getting arrested, they're getting buried." The next 48 hours moved like wildfire. She bypassed local enforcement entirely, didn't trust them, didn't need them. Instead, she took the footage straight to the state attorney general's office. Within days, a grand jury was assembled. The charges rolled out like thunder: kidnapping, false imprisonment, impersonation of law enforcement, conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering under color of authority. By the end of the week, state marshals had warrants in hand. The story didn't stay quiet for long. One local journalist picked it up, then two, then the footage surfaced online and uploaded anonymously but clearly marked Eastfield, Texas. WA justice. The views exploded, comments poured in, people across the country watched in disbelief. WA groups distanced themselves, legal analysts dissected the case, talk shows brought in guests to discuss suburban power gone rogue. The Eastfield WA board scrambled. An emergency meeting was held in the community center, the first in a decade that was standing room only. Marvin Hedges resigned that night, no apology, no explanation, just a quiet exit and a packed suitcase. Some neighbors went silent, afraid of legal blowback, but others finally began to speak. A retired school teacher told Ethan how the May brothers once threatened to fine her for painting her mailbox without pre-approval. A couple down the street said they were filmed without consent for a compliance report just for letting their dog bark at night. A single father described how he received anonymous warnings about curfew violations for his kids playing after sundown. The Calhouns weren't the first, they were just the first to fight back. Courtroom 4C was full long before the session began. Locals, reporters, WA board members, even people from other neighborhoods came to witness what the press now called the suburban showdown. Ethan Calhoun sat quietly near the front, his hands folded, eyes locked forward. Beside him, Rachel adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, revealing the fading marks on her wrist. She had refused any attempt to conceal them. "They need to see it," she said. "All of it, no dramatics, no makeup, just truth." Then the Mays brothers entered, Bill first, shoulders back, grinning like a politician on debate night. Randy followed, slower, scanning the crowd with quiet defiance. Both wore matching suits, gray, too slim for their builds, and carried themselves like minor celebrities waiting for applause. There was none, only the sound of paper shuffling as the court clerk began to read the charges. Count 1 through 37 kidnapping, count 38 through 79 unlawful imprisonment, count 80 through 98 aggravated assault, count 99 through 114 impersonation of law enforcement. Additional charges: conspiracy, coercion, use of unauthorized surveillance, psychological endangerment, misuse of community authority. The prosecution requested 5,124 years per defendant, not by coincidence 1 year, the state attorney said, for every subclause of the WA code they used to justify abuse. The symbolism was sharp and effective. Then came the turning point. Rachel took the stand. She didn't falter, she didn't tremble. Her voice was soft but steady, like someone reading from memory, not emotion, but behind her calm tone was a storm held tightly in place. She described it all: the metal cuff, the concrete floor, the flickering light bulb, the food she couldn't eat. The words they made her repeat over and over until her own voice felt foreign. "They didn't hurt me to silence me," she said. "They did it to make me agree with them." The room held its breath. "They wanted me to believe I was the problem." She recounted the footsteps above her, the sound of the tripod clicking into place, the hours spent staring at a blank wall to remember who she was. She ended with one line: "You don't realize how fragile your name feels until someone tries to rewrite it for you." There was no outburst, no gasp, just a wave of silence that moved across the courtroom like wind through tall grass. The jury didn't move, neither did the judge, but something shifted visibly, irreversibly. The defense didn't cross-examine her, they didn't dare. The sun had barely risen, but courtroom 4C was already full. Reporters whispered in the aisles, locals shifted on wooden benches. Even the jury looked different now, not just tired but changed, like they had seen something they couldn't unsee. At the front of the room sat Judge Jonathan Hoolan, still as a statue, his fingers lightly resting on the handle of his gavel. He had spent years in courtrooms like this and years before that in places far more dangerous, but even now, with decades of law behind him, he had never quite seen a case like this, one where the absurd bled so cleanly into the monstrous. Across from him sat the Mays brothers, once loud, now quiet. Bill's posture had changed, his shoulders sagged beneath his suit jacket. He didn't meet anyone's gaze. Randy, though, still fidgeted, jaw tight, still waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him he had done the right thing, that this was all a misunderstanding, that he was needed. None of that came. When Judge Hoolan finally spoke, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. His words landed like stone on on glass. You created a fiction. You wrapped yourselves in symbols of power, badges, uniforms, documents, and demanded others play along. But behind every badge there must be law, behind every rule authority, behind every order accountability. You had none of these, only belief and fear. The room was silent. You used imitation to destroy trust. You used intimidation to silence dissent. And when your neighbors questioned you, when they resisted, you responded not with dialogue but with domination. He paused, letting the quiet settle. Ethan sat forward, his hand resting gently on Rachel's. She didn't move, but her eyes never left the judge for these actions. Judge Houlihan continued, "This court will not offer leniency. We will not pretend this was a misunderstanding. We will not soften truth in the name of community." He picked up the sentence sheet and read it clearly. For each count of kidnapping, 100 years. For each count of unlawful imprisonment, 75. For each impersonation, each false filing, each moment of coercion, this court applies the full weight of the law. 10,248 years of imprisonment without parole for each defendant. A whisper moved through the crowd, but no one spoke aloud. There was no gavel slam, just the weight of finality hanging in the air. Then the bailiffs moved. Bill stood as instructed. He didn't resist. Randy hesitated, looked back at the judge, then at the jury, then at the audience, searching for something: validation, justification, forgiveness. He found none. As he was led past Ethan and Rachel, he shouted one last time, "We were the ones holding it together. We were the good guys. You'll regret this, all of you." The courtroom didn't react, not with anger, not with applause, only silence, louder than any verdict. As the doors closed behind them, Judge Houlihan finally lifted his gavel and struck it once firmly. "This court is adjourned." And just like that it was over. They left Eastfield behind with no fanfare, no farewell dinners, no goodbye notes, only silence and the sound of a front door closing one last time. Rachel and Ethan sold the house within weeks of the trial's end. The real estate agent told them the market was still strong, but neither of them cared for the numbers. They weren't walking away from value, they were walking away from a place where safety had become negotiable. They headed 3 states south, no destination in mind, only a direction: somewhere quieter, somewhere with fewer fences, both wooden and invisible, somewhere where neighbors cared more about names than noise. Complaints. They found it in a small town near the edge of a lake, the kind of town where porch lights still flickered at night, not because of timers but because someone forgot to change the bulb, the kind of town where mail was delivered by someone who knew your dog's name. Their new house was simple, low-roofed, soft blue siding, a screened-in porch that Rachel immediately filled with potted herbs and quiet books. There were no HOA signs here, no clipboards, no unspoken dress codes for yards. There was room to breathe. On their third morning, while Ethan finished tightening a loose hinge on the mailbox, Rachel came out holding a cardboard box marked decor. Inside it, tucked in bubble wrap and cloth, was the thing she had worked on during her recovery, every thread placed with care, every loop a memory she had chosen to own. It was a wreath, but not the one from before. This one was different, bold, saturated red, not the polite red of holidays or berries, not decorative. This red was electric, raw, defiant. It didn't blend with anything else on the porch, and that was the point. Rachel hung it on the front door, stepped back, looked at it, then nodded satisfied. Ethan joined her. They stood in silence for a while, no words, just understanding. Later that week, as the neighborhood slowly began to notice the new residents, a woman from across the street stopped by during her walk. She wore gardening gloves and carried a bag of fresh lemons. Her voice was kind, curious, and without judgment. She pointed at the wreath, tilting her head slightly. "That's quite something. May I ask what it means?" Ethan looked at Rachel. She smiled just faintly, and then he said, "It's soft but clear. Where we come from, wreaths mean survival." The woman didn't ask more. She nodded and placed the lemons on the porch railing. Sometimes that was all people needed, not an explanation but the assurance that you're still here. The Calhouns didn't erase the past, they didn't pretend it hadn't happened, but in this new place they didn't live in reaction anymore. They lived in choice, and on that quiet street under gentler skies they found what no verdict could give them: peace. Some mornings Rachel still wakes before dawn, not because of a sound but because of a feeling, a quickened breath, a cold trace down her spine. Sometimes it's a smell, rust and concrete dust that never left the skin. Sometimes it's silence itself that brings it back, but the fear doesn't last like it used to. She sits up, breathes slowly, opens the window and listens to the wind move through trees she once only imagined. Then she picks up her brush. She paints now every day, not flowers or still lives or the expected calm of country lakes. Her canvases are bold, chaotic, alive, jagged mountain skies that melt into forests, colors that clash on purpose, scenes that don't ask to be understood, only felt. There's no order, she once told Ethan, and that's the point. Ethan found his rhythm too. He works at the marina restoring old boats people gave up on. He sands them down, repaints them, replaces the hulls. No questions, no explanations, just hands and tools and the satisfaction of making something float again. He doesn't speak of Eastfield anymore, not because he forgot but because it no longer owns his voice. The world is smaller now, in the best way HOA mornings begin with coffee and silence, evenings end with the books and breeze. Sometimes they host dinner for neighbors, other times it's just the two of them in the quiet. But one thing has never changed: their front porch still holds the red wreath, faded now but firm, and just inside the front door on a small side table sits a locked drawer. They hope never to open it, they hope no one ever gives them reason to, but if someone ever knocks, if a stranger shows up with a badge that doesn't shine quite right and a voice too sure of itself, they'll open the door. Ethan will smile politely, and behind him, beyond the wreath, beyond the warmth of the home they rebuilt, there will be clarity and readiness, because once you've lived through someone pretending to have power over you, you never mistake that sound again. The war is over, but some lessons stay with you, sharp, quiet, and permanent, just like the wreath.